Our final reader, sadly, has come time. She comes from a wonderfully neurodiverse household in rural Northern Ireland. She has work published or forthcoming in Bending Genres, Intrepidus Ink, Roi Faineant Press, The Metaworker, Splonk, and The Airgonaut, amongst others. She enjoys writing from a sensory perspective, so please welcome Marie-Louise McGuinness.
Hello there. This is from an essay that was published there in April called "Did Being Neurodivergent Mean I Hated Boybands and Mondays?" So this is a truncated version. As the 1990s dawned and I entered the tween years, the popular music charts were an eclectic offering. The decade began with the 1980s penchant for the power ballad, the song sung by strong voices that you could belt at full throttle, arms slung gaily around swinging necks while swaying to a slow and easy-to-follow rhythm. These songs were for the sociable, those wishing to connect, definitely not for me. They were everywhere. They sat on my neck and dripped uncomfortably down my spine. These were the grinding of teeth songs, the smack my head and cover my ears and scream songs. I never would have admitted the strength of my discomfort, lest the other girls would think me weird. This was also the age of manufactured boy bands, which for most girls my age was a push to obsess over pretty young men who could hold a tune and bust out the worm or headspin on request. Now it is widely known that autistic girls are very likely to engage in the practice of masking, and although completely unaware that I was doing it, I masked like the best of them. I could pick a member to faux crush on in order to keep my normal girl credibility. The one I would choose would never be the cute one, the funny one, or the talented one. No, I would always seek out the underdog, the one I could feel sorry for. Girl bands came later, when record bosses conceded that young girls didn't necessarily have to have a romantic fixation on a celebrity to buy into their product, especially when girl power was the message, and the girls were the cool girls, skinny and beautiful, and with a penchant for mischief that could match any boy. I was a little jealous of boys at this time. They had more innocence. Boys of the ages 10 to 14 weren't exploited in a way that girls were in the 1990s. They weren't marketed magazines that urged them to bypass their childhood in order to be popular, like we were with Ms. Smash Hits, Just 17 and the like. There was even one called My Guy, for goodness sake. Girls were bombarded with makeup tips and fluffy pieces about the latest marketable hunks. The magazines dictated what we should like, what we should wear, and what we should aspire to be, while the powers that be were content to allow the young boys those precious years with the Beano and Desperate Dan. I've always known that I was different, a little odd and shy, with a tendency for dark thoughts and macabre interests. But I only realised that I may be neurodiverse in 2015 at the ripe old age of 34. My son had been diagnosed with autism in early 2014, and after almost 2 years of assessment, and then I was told that it was a boy's thing. Someone even described it to me as a form of extreme maleness. It was purported that there was a causal link between testosterone and cognitive empathy. Therefore, even in the relatively recent 2015, I couldn't equate that condition with me, a reasonably bright woman who's married with children. It was only when I sat in an autism awareness class for parents that I realised that I could be autistic too. The topic was sensory issues in autism. I'm a sensory person. The mere thought of touching cotton wool spurs a swarm of goosebumps to clamber over my skin, and certain patterns in fabric make my stomach heave and my head spin. Noise can dance on my exposed nerves and set me into pure hyperventilating panic. Too much background noise negates my ability to focus. My mind becomes a blur of buzzing nothingness. When I first began listening to music for pleasure, The very first album I bought for myself was not one of the coveted "Now That's What I Call Music" compilations. It was Bob Geldof and the Boomtown Rats. I'd heard the song "I Don't Like Mondays," and I was fascinated by the story of 16-year-old Brenda Ann Spencer, who shot a gun into a school playground in San Diego in 1979. It was a heinous story with a theme that is all too familiar nowadays. But at that time, it really grabbed my attention. I thought deeply about the reasons a young girl would do such a terrible thing. I would lie in bed at night and cry for the school children who must have been terrified. I cried for the adults who died. And I also cried for the young girl who fired a gun because she didn't like Mondays, and the act of killing livened the day. I see now that I just wanted to cry, to feel hurt and sadness, to swim in emotions that I didn't understand. In the mid-90s, I found myself getting to know a new group of girls who were a little more like me. They didn't fret about popularity, and their music tastes aligned with mine. They introduced me to bands such as Nirvana and Pearl Jam, Soundgarden before Black Hole Sun. It was a revelation to me. How I worshipped those depressed boys from the gloom grey of Seattle, not for their looks or for any sexual attraction, but because they were free to express their melancholy and frustration with the world in a swirl of blue-black emotion. I felt their pain. We had sleepovers where we thrashed around bedrooms, hair swinging and without care of how we looked. We didn't seek to be pretty or sexually appealing to boys. We could be us without expectation of what girls should be. It was a homecoming of sorts. In a nightclub, we would headbang on a small crossword painted dance floor, not caring that our hair would go frizzy in the sweaty humidity, that our cheeks would bloom red and glisten with the sweat rolling down the back of our warm necks. Over pints of cider and blackcurrant, long-haired boys and unimpressed girls discussed politics and the environment, the philosophies of Nietzsche, and share their aspirations to become marine biologists in order to save the whales. This was the club where the music was dark and the conversation deep, a safe haven for those who knew they were different. It was comfortable. An anthem for me at that time was Radiohead's Creep, a song that had been banned by the BBC after its release in 1992 for being too depressing. Which is depressing in itself, as this was a song that spoke to people like me, the outsiders, the self-loathers, the youth that didn't know who they were and sometimes wondered if they were anyone at all. That song got us. Whether we were exposed to that song or not didn't change the fact that many of us had experienced the black dog of depression or the isolation of bullying, but upon hearing it, we knew we weren't alone. Dr. David Greenberg, in a 2016 study, attributed the liking for intense music like Nirvana to neuroticism, and I say that's probably true to an extent. Neuroticism is the disposition to experience negative effects such as anxiety, self-consciousness, emotional instability, and depression, and these effects are often noted among the neurodiverse population, especially those who are undiagnosed or late to the party as such. A paediatrician with a specialism in autism explained to me that autistic people, especially those with a typical or high IQ, are at a higher risk of mental health issues such as self-harm and eating disorders. These friends and I are middle-aged women now, and from what I can tell, we have all experienced some of these mental health issues since those heady days of our youth. I personally experienced all of them, and they were exacerbated awfully after experiencing trauma in my late teens. Looking back now, I often wonder if things would have been different if autism in girls was recognised then as it is today. Would I have been able to express myself without feeling less than my peers? Would the understanding of my neurodiversity have impeded the creep of low self-esteem and depression that clouded my youth? And could I have admitted that I too didn't like Mondays? Okay.